dispute between 3 Chinese tourists and Swedish hostel staff and police in Stockholm has sparked a heated public debate. In cases related to Chinese tourists, what role should the local embassy and consulate play? As more and more Chinese people live, work, study and travel abroad, how should Chinese people prepare before they go to different countries? How should China adjust its strategy or resource allocation in ensuring its nationals' rights and interests overseas? In March, the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs released a draft regulation on consular protection and assistance. How significant is such legislative work? To what extent can this help prevent consular protection from being misused? Recently, the Chinese Consulate General in Osaka helped evacuate more than 1,000 Chinese tourists stranded by the powerful Typhoon Jebi at Osaka's Kansai International Airport. What are the challenges consulates face in providing timely support during natural disasters?
As China develops rapidly and interacts more with the world, there is also a growing demand for protecting the rights and interests of Chinese nationals overseas. In general, Chinese people speak favorably of the consular protection they are getting. But what should be the rational understanding of a consular service? What is the significance of issuing a regulation on consular protection and assistance? And how should China adjust its strategy and resource allocation in massive overseas evacuations during political conflicts and natural disasters? To discuss these issues and more, I'm happy to be joined in the studio by Professor Xia Liping from China Foreign Affairs University, Rong Ying, Vice President and Senior Research Fellow with the China Institute of International Studies, and Zhao Miao, a partner in Anjie Law Firm. That's our topic. This is a dialogue. I'm Yang Rui. Welcome to dialogue discussion here. What do you think of the latest development in Sweden, where the Chinese embassy stepped in to help solve the crisis surrounding the alleged mistreatment of the Chinese nationals, 3 of them? Now, what do you think of the representation of the Chinese embassy? Do you think this is the right time, right place for the right reason?
I think there are several aspects to look into this consular protection case. First, it is the duty and the responsibility of Chinese embassies and consulates abroad to provide protection assistance to Chinese citizens abroad. And second, I think there are many different opinions and versions of this story. We don't know what really happened, but one basic fact that can be confirmed is that the elderly couple of this citizen were dropped by the police into a garden, but really it is a kind of a cemetery near the suburb. So, and it is reported that similar cases happened in 2015, and the citizen involved in this case faced the life threat, and he was found dead the second day morning after the police dropped him early in the, I think in midnight, the day before that day. So this is a really threat to life. I think there is a good reason for the Chinese embassy to question the behavior of the Swedish policeman.
Now, Mr. Rong, you've been working for the Foreign Ministry of China for years. Each year, without exceptions, State Councillor and Foreign Minister Wang Yi said on the sidelines of the NPC plenary session that consular practices and the protection for the overseas Chinese nationals, Chinese nationals overseas, remains a priority on the agenda of the Foreign Ministry. But do you think with a drastic increase in the number of Chinese outbound tourists, more would have to be done to ensure safety of the Chinese travelers?
Yeah, it is true. I think the consular protection and assistance has always been the priority issues for China's Foreign Ministry and for the State Councillor and the Minister himself, as we have found that when he took over, I think more than 7 years ago, when he was first appointed Foreign Minister, the first sort of department he visited, inspected, was the consular department. And it was at that time he made a very important speech that the Foreign Ministry and also China's diplomacy will make the protection of safety and the security of Chinese nationals as a priority issue for China diplomacy. And ever since then, I think we have found that the consular affairs, consular protection systems remains a high agenda. And of course, the development, the situation is changing very fast, as you rightly said, that there's a growing expectation and growing demand for the foreign ministry to do more. And the question is how much and how. And of course, the gap is also enlarging. I think the Chinese Foreign Ministry, if you look at the personnel concerned, those diplomats who engage in consular affairs are growing not to the point of that demand. If you look at the statistics I have so far is that one consular official has to handle over 180,000 sort of personnel, compared to the United States that was around just 5,000. So a Chinese consular official has to take care of more than 30 times more of the work. For U.S. diplomats.
That's a huge amount of workload
yeah,
for Chinese diplomats.
That's indeed, yeah, that's quite a lot.
But you didn't give us suggestions on how to reform the consulate work. The labor shortage and the sharp increase in the amount of such complaints and grievances that the Chinese nationals filed to local Chinese consulates and embassies.
Well, I think if you look at the foreign ministries, per se, they have done a lot by developing kind of a more kind of I said the kind of five-pronged approach, pulling together the effort by the central government, which is more, I think, related to the foreign ministry, and the local government, and also the enterprises, and also I think the personnel, particular person, the national traveling outside. But so it takes a kind of efforts, all-round efforts by those concerned. I think for me, as far as my experience is concerned, a lot of incidents like happened in Sweden is quite sort of classic in a way that there's certainly related to the question of how the police of a particular country can handle a case like that, but they also related to the situation or question that how a Chinese national and how he or she know what kind of legitimate rights and legitimate legal rights and interests is can pursue.
In fact, the Chinese ambassador in Sweden said the Zheng family failed to contact the Chinese embassy in the first time. So, as a lawyer, what do you think of the response from the Swedish legal authorities in the wake of this incident? Because obviously they have turned down the Chinese demand for serious punishment for the alleged mistreatment of the Chinese tourists there.
Well, I've been following the news there, not that closely. In general, I feel proud that our Swedish consul there actually voiced his anger, voiced his insatisfaction against the maltreatment of the Chinese citizens. But from a legal technical perspective, I actually didn't agree with Professor Xia, where the three passengers, three visitors in Sweden, potentially they didn't have the right to remain on the property of others. Either it's a hotel business runner, and then once they got the message you're leaving, and then you actually should leave. You should respect the ownership of the property owner. And then in terms of the police, I looked through some of the video clips there. I didn't see any undue or overly used police force to, I wouldn't say drop them, I would say remove them from where they shouldn't be. So if you look at that part, I don't think they have the legitimate reasons to remain at the hotel, although it is a little bit inhumane for the hotel owner and also the police to actually kind of rudely or didn't really give them help. So that's kind of from a legal perspective kind of analysis. And similarly, that actually reminded me about another case, although that case doesn't involve any Chinese citizen. Do you still recall the case with United Airlines Sometimes, I mean, when we talk about legal cases, all the details really matters. For that case, actually, I believe the police. There's something wrong with the police, how they handle the case, because in the first instance, it was like, there was nothing wrong with the passenger. All the things, all the legal duties was that the United Airlines, they broke their obligations, contractual obligations to send the passengers to where they bought ticket for. And then it's only through kind of mutual negotiation where you can remove them. Not really remove, you can reject them or they can get off the plane. And the use of force is definitely improper. And that's where I believe police, their action is kind of accusable.
The consulate service covers a wide range of things that diplomats are expected to do. For example, in gun-related violence in California or other states of the United States, it seems young Chinese students do not have much knowledge about what kind of dangers they are facing. Mr. Rong, do you think this is also one of the things that both Chinese nationals and the Chinese Foreign Ministry need to come to terms with?
Yeah, that's exactly I think the Foreign Ministry is doing. I mean, you look at the website of Foreign Ministry, there's one kind of a handbook of 80-something pages and explaining everything in great detail, how to manage the issues or handle the issues like that. The most important thing, of course, this is meant to, of course, to so-called prevent or prepare the Chinese nationals, I mean, who's traveling or living or staying, or when they have come across, I mean, situation like that. And it is true, I think, there's a great need for Chinese nationals who is traveling or who is about traveling. But I think from the other hand, I guess the Chinese government, Foreign Ministry in particular, consular department and section others, they are also very well, I think, ready to help, and in case that they run into this situation like that. So if we refer to the case, that Sweden sort of a case, the incident, I think the consular department and the ambassador included has done a great job. But of course, it always comes to the deep issue that they say whether it go through the legal or sort of humanitarian ground. There's a lot of, I think, debates.
Zhao Miao, nowadays we are all travelers. We travel abroad very often as China gets integrated with the rest of the world. Last year we had 130 million Chinese tourists outbound. So other than the danger of violating laws in the host country, what about following the rules? Now these days, overseas politicians repeatedly emphasize the importance of following up the rules. It's not only about the commerce, transactions, it's also about travelers who are clearly aware of some of the boundaries and the limits you cannot cross, the red lines you cannot cross. Hong Kong is a place known for the protection of private property, and Sweden is no exception. Now when the hotel is privately owned, they have their own rules. It's not just about laws, it's about following the common sense of obeying the rules. Now in China, perhaps we are not kind of familiar with this protection of private property.
Well, you can treat it as the local laws, or in other, I would agree more that the more accurate word would be common sense. Sometimes, because of the social, environment is kind of different. Like Chinese people, we're less, we have less awareness as to like certain unnecessary body distance you have to keep with people. We tend to be very loud in a public place. And sometimes we even step into other people's gardens because, sometimes
someone got killed a few years ago in the United States. A Japanese tourist stepped into the private courtyard of a local property and he was killed.
Exactly.
And yet the guy who killed him was acquitted.
For sure. That's understandable because that's private property, and for Chinese people it's a trespasser, and sometimes it really depends on the homeowner. What does he think? If he thinks his life is in threat or his property is in really real threat, he can really hold a gun and fire. And then that's kind of a culture difference or culture we have to be aware of, and that there are rules and boundaries. Sometimes I would personally advocate respecting of rules other than, based on like national emotions and trying to decide what is wrong, what is right.
Perhaps there's a story that took place in Sweden. The issue of nationalism should also deserve attention of the media. You are watching Dialogue with Professor Xia Liping from China Foreign Affairs University. She is also an expert of consular protection. Rong Ying, Vice President and Senior Research Fellow with the China Institute of International Studies, and Zhao Miao, a lawyer, a partner in Angie Law Firm. We shall be back in a couple of minutes. Stay with us, please. Welcome back. Now, the story of the Zheng family who was mistreated in Sweden was a breaking news and went viral on the internet when an editorial of the Global Times described this as a serious offense against the Chinese dignity. This editorial elevated the issue to one of nationalism, and therefore the editorial and Mr. Hu Xijin himself came under fire from many who are critical of the exaggeration of the issue. So, Zhao Miao, I wonder if all of you agree that with the rise of China's economic status globally, do you think we need to be very careful about the alleged self-inflation, or Western media will tend to describe China's behavior internationally as assertive, and therefore sometimes we tend to ignore internal problems, the behavioral problems of the Chinese nationals?
I think, yeah, I agree that when Chinese travelers, when they are abroad, they should observe the laws and the rules. It is more easy to preserve the laws because they are more aware of what kind of...
It's easier to blame the law.
No. It is easy for them to follow the law, to observe the law. But as to the rules, just as Ms. Zhao Miao just mentioned, that, in China, I think our social culture is quite different from that. In our culture, maybe, traditionally we think that speaking aloud is a kind of happiness because it means that you are healthy. But this kind of opinion should be changed gradually when you traveled abroad. In the public area, you should keep quiet. Yeah, I think that is the basic rule, and also you should stay in line at any time.
I'm afraid bad habits die hard.
Yeah.
It's years of education and years of enlightening lectures to let them know there are always things that you cannot do, or you have to handle very carefully when you leave China, your own host country. Does it mean, for example, Mr. Rong, that prospective Chinese tourists got to be briefed or receive some kind of training before they get a visa or after they get a visa and leave for a country, for example, in Europe?
Yeah, exactly. I think the foreign ministry is trying to do, as I said, the handbook, there's very specific instruction or advice that how, Chinese national should be prepared. The advice, I think, is exactly, first I have to get to know about, the conditions, the regulations, the laws and norms of a particular country being visiting. And of course, even with that, I think it will take some time, even years, for Chinese who very few, take the example of this family. I believe that the fathers and mothers, the parents, they may have traveled, sometime, but not in a particular way to have been sort of being
the learning curve takes years.
That's
now,
right.
One particular question for Professor Xia, since you are an expert of consulate issues. In 1997, Hong Kong came back. Macau followed suit very quickly. Now, what should Beijing do to help protect their dignity and security?
You mean
when people from Macau and Hong Kong
traveling abroad?
To a third country.
To a certain country, of course, yeah. According to the guidance for Chinese consular protection and assistance, the book issued by the Chinese Foreign Ministry, that people from Hong Kong, from Macau, and also from Taiwan, they are all Chinese citizens. They can get the consular help from Chinese embassies and consulates abroad.
A few years ago, a devastating earthquake took place in New Zealand. And there are some Chinese there were some Chinese nationals, including those from Taiwan and Hong Kong. They were all given an airlift and evacuated from the epicenter of the earthquake. Not long ago, maybe 10 days ago, a storm seriously affected the work of the airport in Japan. So there were some discussions about whether the Chinese consulate reached out to the Chinese nationals who were left stranded at the airport, and some of the Taiwanese also benefited from this protection. Is it true?
Yeah, it's true.
It is true.
Yeah, it is true.
The nationals from Taiwan could also enjoy equal protection and assistance.
So my question is, from our side, is it like a mandatory for the Chinese embassies to offer such consular protection to, people from Taiwan, Macau, and Hong Kong, versus we actually did it? So the question is it mandatory? Is it in the law?
I think the consular affairs is an issue related to the sovereignty. So only a sovereign country or sovereign representation of a sovereign country can provide kind of a service or protection for its nationals in a particular country. And I think that is, in other words, the nationals of that particular country are entitled to that kind of service. But that it would not exercise that protection or assistance until and unless he or she asked for that. So according to the law, according to the international law, certainly I think citizens from, by the way, we're talking about consular protections and assistance, we are referring exactly to the Chinese nationals. Chinese nationals, legal persons and non-legal persons instituted. They are legitimate and legal rights and interests. So the incidents like that have been happened many times. Certainly people from Hong Kong, from Hong Kong, the holders of Hong Kong passport or traveling documents, Macau, and by law, and Taiwanese sort of residents. The question is that if they would ask, and when they ask, the Chinese missions representation, they're always ready, and they are more than happy to provide that kind of a service. But there are always kind of incidents and reports that the so-called Taiwanese representation, in particular, they were not able to do that. That exactly shows, because this is related to international law. This is related to kind of even bilateral arrangement between Chinese government, People's Republic of China, and a particular country where China have sort of a diplomatic relations. So I thought this is certainly then a legal issue, certainly then a political issue, but it's also more kind of a sort of a issue that China shows that the government of China is able to do.
Last year, many Chinese were very happy to see the huge success of the box office of a couple of Chinese movies. One is War Warrior, the other Red Sea Operations. Both have a lot to do with the consular protection. Particularly at the end of a Red Sea operation, the Chinese Foreign Ministry says proudly, look, whenever you travel, wherever you are, you enjoy the consular protection of the Chinese Foreign Ministry. So do you think this will easily fuel the sense of national pride when Chinese nationals travel abroad? See, we have the hotlines around the clock at 7/24, and therefore whenever they have some alleged mistreatment, thefts, robbery, brutal behavior of the local cops, they would give a call to the Chinese embassy. This often happens. So what do you think of the hotline and the publicity work of the Foreign Ministry?
The hotline was a very important.
Very important.
Yeah. When Chinese citizens abroad, they encounter difficulties, they can call this hotline. Also, they can call the numbers, telephone numbers for local embassies and consulate, Chinese embassies and the consulates. Yeah.
But the issue is, in most cases, if not all of the cases, it seems the local cops fail to carry out any effective investigations or sort it out. In this case, maybe the Chinese travelers would have to be prepared for the worst case scenario. Are you, for example, John, are you prepared for this kind of nasty possibility? You have lost your passport, you've lost your euros and dollars, and yet the police would only say, sorry, we cannot do it. We can do nothing about this. This happens very often.
I think that's kind of expected, and that actually happened like 2 months ago in this summer holiday, where a very close working partner of mine, she brought her son to travel in Paris, where it is a very like tourist, very popular area. She just like she acted in the United States. She put her handbag and cameras like just like 1 meter away from her and her son. She was shooting pictures for her son, where somebody just took her bag away, and then she tried to kind of, she actually immediately saw that. She said, stop, and then the guy started to run, and she kind of chased a few meters, and she realized, you know, it's not good for her to chase. And then she called the counselor.
Now, a very, very general question for each of you at the end of this very interesting discussion. It's the image of the Chinese nationals and travelers. Now, we are getting integrated with the rest of the world in the process of globalization. China is always described as kind of assertive, and the issue of nationalism tends to capture headlines and become front-page stories. What do you think should be the proper behavior of the Chinese nationals?
Yeah, I read a report. It said that Chinese, overseas Chinese, was listed as one of the most 10 resented travelers in the world. I think there are many ways we can do. First, from the individual level, I think they should know more about the foreign culture. Before they travel, they can learn this from the website. For example, the Foreign Ministry has a consular service website, have the travel warnings and some knowledge about the local culture of the destination. And the second is that Foreign Ministry and Chinese embassies, you know, they issue the brochures, especially the local embassies. They compile some menus that, according to the characteristics of the local safety, local security situation. So I think maybe this kind of brochures can also be found on the website of the Chinese embassies. I think Chinese citizens could do more homework before they travel abroad.
Well, I think the Foreign Ministry will continue, as always, stand ready and continue to provide necessary and possible consular assistance and support to Chinese nationals to protect their safety, their legitimate and legal rights. But the equally most important thing is, of course, the China, as I've been talking about, that the Chinese nationals, before they travel, they have to read very carefully, I think, the handbooks and take really seriously the advice. And last but not least, the most important thing for me is that make sure wherever he or she is, like at home and abroad, you have to follow the rules. You have to follow the regulation. The more important, respect the traditions and the culture of a particular country, if you want to have a successful and happy sort of travel.
I agree with Professor Yang, where the consular protection needs to be necessary and enough, sufficient. And on the other side, this message from Sweden, I think it kind of sent out an improper message where, in my opinion, we kind of, citizens or nationals kind of abused the use of consular protection in this case, where it's on their fault. Actually, but still, it's good for us to have this kind of consular protection, but then we don't want it to be overused either.
Thank you so much. That's it for this edition of Dialogue on the image of Chinese nationals abroad, as well as the consular service. In the future, I'll see you next time. Goodbye.